So what I've heard is that you love the challenge of this job, the creativity involved, learning new things, the flexibility and the autonomy that it gives you. And probably after hearing you, now many people would want to try to become dialogue writers, and they would be thinking like, what are the steps that they can take, how to take those first steps in the industry, and the training you gave, the online course you created, that's one of the first steps you can take. And you give more tips on this throughout the course. But I'm wondering if you could suggest what could be those other first steps that people can take if they want to join this industry.
It sort of depends on where you're coming from. I mean, if a lot of people are already in the industry, they are dubbing voices, or they are dubbing editors, or sound people. So they already know people in the industry, and from what I hear, it's not different in most other countries. It's a very small industry; everybody knows each other, and it's difficult to get your foot in the door. So if you're already in the industry, you have that advantage. You have your foot in the door. And when and you have to tell people that that's what you want to do. If you're a translator and you want to write dubbing script, tell people you want to write dubbing scripts. Tell them. I mean, I did translating for dubbing for several years, because you need to earn you need to earn your living somehow. Even though I'm not really a good translator, but that's the one thing that I knew I could sort of do in a serviceable way. And I did that for a while, and then I met someone who taught me dubbing script writing. And when I started, I just wanted to write scripts. And for a year, I had to tell people who offered me translations that I'm not doing translation. I'm doing scripts. And then they'd say, we have somebody for the script already. And I'm like, "Hmm." So it took a year to get, moved from one sort of drawer into the other. But I did, have that in. I actually didn't have any connections in the industry. I did an internship at a dubbing company, and saw all the different steps in the dubbing process. Again, sounding like a grandma, but when they still had, actual film, like on reels. It was fun to see, because the editing process, obviously, they literally sort of, where the word cut comes from, literally cut through a piece of celluloid. Um, so I did an internship at a dubbing company. I think that's probably, if you're not in the industry, that's a very good way to start, because you meet people and you see where the process is. A dubbing script is part of a very complex process, and it's good to know where it fits in, who sees it, and who needs it, and what people do with it. So I probably would recommend, if you're not in the industry, an internship at a dubbing company. And then, very much depending on the country, the way dubbing scriptwriters are trained is so different. Not very many come from an academy or from an academic background. In Germany, certainly not. There's not a university that offers. There's a couple that offer audiovisual translation in general, and maybe we'll have that as a module.
Right.
But
That was always very surprising to me, that in some countries, including major dubbing countries like Germany, there's not that much training available, certainly not in those traditional education institutions. And I think that's also why this course that you created is so important, because in many territories, dubbing scriptwriters are needed. The companies depend on having a pool of those excellent writers. You say that in the course, and yet there's very little training available. And you mentioned, I think, gave very good advice. So if I want to go into dubbing script writing, and I cannot immediately go into it, what I can do is to try to get any role in the industry. And then it's common for people to transition from other roles in the dubbing industry into dubbing script writing. And I want us now to think for a while about the skill set that's required and what people need to be aware of and work on. For instance, let's say I'm a dubbing actor or a dubbing actress, and I'm already in the industry, but I'm thinking I want to get trained and work as a dialogue writer. Do I already have some strengths? What are the new skills that I need to learn?
Well, if I would want it to be really snarky, I said, if you're a dubbing voice in Germany and you want to be a dubbing scriptwriter, all you need to say is, "Hello, got your scripts, get going." It's in Germany. That's the very traditional. People for some reason assume that if you're a dubbing voice, you can write a dubbing script, which I tend to disagree. It's possible, but not necessarily. Um, if you're a dubbing voice, obviously what you can already do is you see, you get that you see where the bilabials are. You see what's technically a good dub. You're not necessarily a good dialogue writer. So that's what you would need to learn, to see where dialogue sort of goes in hand. Is that the answer to the question? Does it sound natural? If you're a dubbing voice, you will be exposed to good scripts and bad scripts, and so you don't want to imitate the bad ones. And that's sometimes actually in the fray of everyday thing. It's not that easy to say actually. So what was good? And why was it good or why was it bad? So if you come to it from the point of view of a dubbing voice, you definitely need to learn how to write a good script. And I think that's the basis actually for everything, completely irrespective of the workflow and completely irrespective of the role of AI or not AI or whatever. It's like you need to know how to write a good script. That needs to work on an emotional level. And if you don't know that, then you won't be able to QC anything either. I mean, it's like you won't. Um, in so and Germany sort of as an industry is very studio focused, very sort of recording focused. In France, for example, because as I said, the bon rythme, you have the detecteur, you don't need to see where the bilabials and where all these things are. It's very much more writer focused. It's so most I don't really know any, well, I don't know that many, but, it's like the dubbing script writers in France are not necessarily former voice actors, not nearly to the degree that they are, here in Germany. Um, so if you're a translator and go into dubbing script writing, you kinda need to, well, that's a dangerous thing to say, but you kinda need to forget the original for a moment. You need to really change that focus, change the perspective to the German part, or the target language part, whatever the target language is. You might
Would
be
you,
very,
sorry, what you said earlier, that you need to sort of switch off this part of your brain that's thinking in English, right?
yeah, absolutely. And it's very difficult, as a translator. I mean, sometimes you just need to approach it from the other direction. Not so what did the character say, but what would the character say if he was German or she was German. So I always say I'd create little twins for every character. They're the exact same, except for they speak German. Other than that, they're like the exact same thing. So another reason why I say I'm not a translator, it's sort of like it's more like a character builder, in that sense. And I think that's what if you come from translation, that's what you will have to learn. Obviously, you need to be true to the original, but being true to the original can come from all kinds of different perspectives, not just from the translation part. Like, yeah. Um,
There's the spirit of the original that you're reflecting. It's
it's
not
yeah, and
only
it's
about specific word; it's about the emotion that we are creating in this scene.
Yeah, yeah. I had an example the other day. It was I think the first line of one episode of a medical drama. There's a helicopter comes in, and the EMT says, "32-year-old male tried to beat a speeding train, didn't make it." Okay, very simple, very straightforward, and you can translate that perfectly. You just say, a 32-year-old male. Nothing difficult. However, um, we needed to he says that very fast, so you kinda need to save a little bit of time. And also the image that's conjured up here, try to beat a speeding train is sort of like this, you know, plain wagon sort of riding alongside a train, which in a German head, that doesn't make any sense. In the German, and what actually happens is that they cross, right? Is that it doesn't go like this, it just goes like this. So you have a different geometry in your head as a German. So this is a good example of how it's not like translating. You sort of mm, you transport it to a different culture. In the end, the sentence that I wrote was more like car accident at a train crossing. He wanted to get across, but the train was faster. It's a completely different sentence. It's not a translation at all, but it conveys the same thing. And the 32-year-old male, I kind of scrapped because I knew this was getting said later anyway. I know it's a standard thing to say, but it's actually a standard thing that Germans don't say in an emergency situation for real. So it's kind of odd anyway. We have to do it because they have to say something. But that's a good example of how different the approaches between like a translation and a dubbing script. You also have to keep in mind this is the first sentence in the episode. You know, it has to have like a dynamic. The image has to be right there. You know, you can't think. You have to really get the situation as an audience right away. Um, so I don't know where I started with this, but anyway, this is the difference.
Yeah, but thank you. I really appreciate that you shared this example with us, and you were able to illustrate all this based on this example. And now perhaps we can move. Go on, yeah.
And we haven't even talked about very briefly only about length, but lip movements either, as we haven't even talked about that at all. So,
Yeah.
when people say, and then you know, what's more important, sort of the lip sync or the content, I always say, yeah, you know, both, obviously, but and it's difficult for me to say because obviously I'm experienced enough that the lip movement part sort of rattles on in my brain without me consciously thinking about it. This is like, you know, gear shifting in a car. He's like, I don't think about it anymore. But I really, I I do not, apart from like a very rough, you know, bilabial in the middle of the sentence or like mouth closed at the end and doesn't open up for the next 5 minutes. Beyond that, I really I don't think about that in a first step. Then I try it out and I'm like, oh, great sentence, but unfortunately, and then the whole Scrabble playing part starts.
Right. And it seems we could go on talking about this because it's such a fascinating and complex topic for hours. We could go on, but hopefully, well, fortunately, you've already created the course and it's all in the course.